Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is a special post-election City Talk. It's the morning after. Democrats control the House, the Senate within their grasp, and 6 more Democratic governors. Hillary wins big, so does the Terminator. For our next morning post-mortem and preview, 2 premier political wise guys. Ed Rollins, one of America's foremost political strategist and communications expert and chairman of the Rollins Strategy Group, and Bill Cunningham, former communications director to Mayor Bloomberg and a manager director at then Kloves Communications. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Early morning, the morning after. What's the message? And who are the messengers?
I think the message is change, start talking to each other down in Washington and stop pointing fingers, and let's figure out what we can do about our troops and resolving Iraq in some way that we can all agree on.
Ed?
I think the message is twofold. One is the country is dissatisfied with the war, and obviously that's front and center. And secondly, they're dissatisfied with the way business is being run in Washington. The overwhelming mention of corruption by the exit polls means that people see what's going on, and they don't think that they're getting their representatives are not representing them well, and their ethics are certainly front and center.
Jim Talent, in his concession speech last night, said that the headwinds were very, very strong this year. What were these Republican headwinds? I mean, it seems from the exit polls that the answer is obvious, that it was Iraq and Bush. How does that play? And is all politics local except when it's not?
Well, the amazing thing to me is the only 2 people in the country that didn't see the headwinds were the 2 guys who were running this operation from the White House. Karl Rove is a very smart guy. And obviously the president is a former cheerleader who wanted to go out and be a cheerleader. He wanted to basically make his case to the country on why we're in the war. And he loves to campaign, unlike his father, who loved to govern. And I think to a certain extent, the Democrats wanted a national campaign, and he made it a national campaign. And he made it on their issues, not his issues. And I think at the end of the day, his party paid a price.
This seems to me to be a major strategic blunder here. Why remind people of the very thing that they're dissatisfied? Is it as stupid as it seems?
I think they had so much confidence in whatever their machine was, their vaunted machine.
To get out the vote.
And I think the get out the vote effort works great in a presidential race, and it may very well work great in a midterm if you have something you can't go and drag people to the polls. And the president on a robocall basically saying, vote for me, is not enough to make people go necessarily vote for them.
You were with the mayor last night.
Yes.
And your cronies and associates. What did you see, and what did they see as the message? What did it mean? What did it portend for the country, the city, the state, Mike Bloomberg?
Well, I think everybody's talking about what it means for the country, and clearly it's a pretty divided country, and it has now flipped the House back from the Republicans to the Democrats. We saw that coming for the last week or so. Everybody knew that was going to happen. I actually had lunch yesterday with former Governor Carey, and everybody around the table was picking the number that the House would change by. And somebody would say 15, 18, 22. And he had originally said 22, and then he goes, 28. I said, what made you change your mind? He goes, I just put my finger in the air. He says, the dissatisfaction with everybody in politics is you can feel it. And he was closer to the mark than anybody else. As for what it means for the city, well, we should be getting a chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. That can only help.
Yep.
On the downside, Pete King, who was very helpful to us on Homeland Security matters, is going to lose the chairmanship of his committee, but I don't know, if you have the chairman of Ways and Means, you can probably talk to a lot of congressmen.
And then you may have the chairman of the chairwoman of the Rules Committee too, with Louise Slaughter. So you've got real power coming in. Chuck Schumer, I mean, among those people who were not on the ballot, it would seem that Chuck Schumer's a clear winner.
No question about that.
And okay, well, what's the nature of his win? What does he win? What does and what does this 2006 election mean looking forward?
Chuck Schumer proved to Democrats and to Republicans, but more to Democrats, that they have the ability to go out and match Republicans dollar for dollar. Our great advantage has always been that we in our national committees could go out and always outraise and outspend. And I think he went out. He's clearly outraised Elizabeth Dole and the Senate Campaign Committee, which has been our best fundraising arm. He basically made that operation a first-rate operation, and kept. There were 3 or 4 races we had potential in the beginning of the year, and Washington, Florida, Nelson, and Nebraska, and he went out and recruited strong candidates against our incumbents, and we were unable to recruit strong candidates against their incumbents. So the game all became our defense with unlimited resources on their side, which I think made the big difference.
And the vaunted get out the vote operation.
Look, Chuck brought a Brooklyn attitude to the Democrats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I understand.
Stay
yes.
on offense. Let the other guy worry about defense.
Right.
He
keep
raised the
kicking
money,
it.
as Ed said, and he did. He recruited, I think, 5 or 6 of the candidates that are in the winning column today. He personally went out and
So what does this do for Chuck Schumer personally and politically?
Well, first of all, I think he's no longer a backbencher, and he's viewed as a very serious player in the Senate. I don't know how long Reid lasts as the majority leader, but certainly Schumer, who is a great legislative leader, has to be viewed as a serious player in the long term. Either as a committee chairman or certainly as a member of the leadership, I would think.
Yeah, I would think so. And you could see that last night. He was up on stage, Rahm Emanuel on the House side, but Chuck, the 2 guys who put together the mechanics of this, the money, the candidates, and they were sharing the stage with the leaders of each of their bodies, Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. The other thing is Chuck probably is the guy who doesn't mind giving bad news to somebody, and it would be my guess that he's the one told John Kerry, go home.
Yeah.
Don't show up for the last week of the campaign. You're not helping. And I think for that alone, a lot of senators today are probably very thankful that Chuck Schumer was there.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I think, I don't know what Kerry intended on making, but all he did was remind an awful lot of voters of what a weak candidate he was 2 years ago, and the underbelly of the Democrats has always been that people view them as not being strong on national security. And I think right at a very critical point in time, he stood up and they spent a week debating what he said and whether you support the troops or not.
Right. I mean, he took the Democrats. Go ahead.
Well, another week of that, and Virginia might have been. Virginia has over 500,000 retired military personnel.
Sure.
If that had carried on and it became a test of pro or anti-military, you might have had a very different day in Virginia
He
yesterday.
totally changed the momentum. The message became an anti-message against him. It also reminded Democrats, me included, why I didn't particularly like Kerry in the first place. and part of it was his pompous elitism.
Well, I think
a guy from Brooklyn, come on.
I think it knocked him out of serious. I mean, he was the guy who was off running to run against Hillary, and I think it knocked him out.
He was a dead man walking.
I think so.
Yeah.
Who else? Who emerges from this as 2008 candidates, leaders in the legislature, either in the Senate or the House, depending if the Democrats take over? What do we see sort of institutionally? And what does that mean for 2008 presidential? And, well, let's stop there. That's a lot of questions just there.
Hillary met all the thresholds she had to meet yesterday, last night. And her people were going around last night saying, we're not really saying this, but this really does set us up to talk about going forward. And even the language that they used last night about we're taking back the country, it starts here, it starts tonight, is very thinly veiled references to what's coming.
When does it come? I'm sorry.
Well,
go ahead.
it's happening. If you don't think that today, her people are getting calls or making calls, I'd be very shocked.
Oh, she's been running. I mean, she's been running a presidential campaign. The money raised, how she's raised it, the geographical distribution.
And she finished with a surplus.
I know. Come on, and she's contributed.
She's the closest thing to an incumbent we have, and the one thing it does for me, being new to New York, is I have to explain to every New Yorker how she can win. People say to me day in and day out, "Oh, she can't win," and I said, "Listen, I've worked for 5 people who've been president who people said couldn't win. The terrain is going to be the same. I think what yesterday proved is you now have states like Virginia and Ohio, and some of those Rocky Mountain states that are now in play. It's not, we've run 2 elections over exactly the same map, and we now have an opportunity to expand. And she's not going to lose any state that Gore or Kerry got, and obviously has an opportunity to expand that.
And the argument, traditionally, the conventional wisdom has been the opposite, that she couldn't expand beyond Kerry and Gore, and she was sort of locked in to a permanent blue state status. Right. But clearly the election results portend something else out there that may be going on.
She got 20% of the Republicans and a fourth of the conservatives self-identified and overwhelming. I mean,
but part of it is who she ran against. Come on.
At the end of the day, I totally agree with that. But at the end of the day, she still basically ran a good campaign out of her back pocket.
Oh, absolutely.
Ed's an old boxer. I don't mean old, but a former boxer.
An old former boxer.
But, Joe Louis, who did he beat? Well, he beat whoever showed up in front of her, and I think that's the case with Hillary. Right.
Okay. Who else? Who else emerges? Who is the Democratic field, and what are they saying? What's their appeal? What's their narrative?
I think the only one who can be a player, if he wants to be a player still, and that's still a big question mark, is Gore. I mean, I think everybody else is a minor figure. Edwards, all the rest of them that ran around in the course of this. I think a guy who did emerge in this campaign is a very significant player. Is another New Yorker, and that's Rudy Giuliani, who basically had real star quality all over this country and went all over, as did McCain, obviously, but had real star quality and was very aggressive in his campaigning for candidates. And many people said he doesn't meet the litmus test, but to candidates and to Republican Party activists out there, he's a real star.
Rudy?
Well, I think Rudy earned a lot of chits. He went to an awful lot of states. He campaigned from local office up to Senate and House
A lot
offices.
of losers, though. No?
Well, that was the nature of the year.
Okay.
But,
Does that hurt, though? I'm sorry, Bill.
Look, Ed worked for Republican presidents, but as I recall, I remember reading how Richard Nixon campaigned for House members. Absolutely. Win or lose, it pays off when you decide to go national yourself. That the infrastructure is all local in each state. And you get credit for showing up and helping, whether they win or lose. That person's going to remember it. If they don't, then they're not the person you thought they were.
Right. Do the so-called Rudy deficits, so they're not prohibitive? His sort of pro-immigration tolerance, gay tolerance.
I think the one thing the election proved yesterday is George W. Bush checked all the boxes in 2000. And I think if there was a failure, people say the failure is being a strong leader. He may be a leader and leading us in a different direction than we want to go. There's no question about Rudy's leadership quality. And if the country wants a leader, and this is a field that's probably down now, I think, to 3 people. I think it's Rudy, I think it's McCain, and I think Governor Romney are probably the 3 at this point in time. We're going to get the first shot at least raising the money, getting the operatives. And my sense is 2 out of the 3 there don't meet the litmus tests. So it could be a different Republican Party, and equally as important after yesterday. However we put this thing back, there's a big defection among the religious right. A good 26, 28% according to the exit polls.
Is this a blip, though? I mean, does this portend more structural and
who
ideological?
Who knows? This has been a constituency group that's not been a solid Republican, and unfortunately, I think Carl's whole premise was to build the base on that back, making it a total Southern party,
right?
As opposed to a more moderate party or a blue collar, sort of the Nixon-Reagan model, which was sort of a small business, blue collar, working people's party. We sort of became a big corporation, religious right party, and to a certain extent lost an appeal to a lot of voters.
What is the Democratic Party?
What is it? Well, I think if you look around the landscape yesterday, you're going to see it's a very broad tent, because at least 3 of the congressmen in Indiana, 3 of the Democratic candidates in the contested Indiana House seats, could have passed as Republicans on the issues. They were pro-gun, they're anti-choice. So you're not voting social issues. You are clearly voting Democrat versus Republican to send a message to Washington. And the Democrats, by taking candidates like that, there was a time, Senator-elect Bob Casey's father was not allowed to speak at a Democratic National Convention because he didn't agree with the party on the issue of abortion. But now this leadership in the Democratic House is saying, you're entitled to your opinion. If you're the best candidate, we'll support you. We'll back you up in the field. That's a big change, and it may create some schisms within issue groups of the Democrats. That's the challenge they're going to face now. Republicans backing on the religious right to get elected found out that they elevated those social and moral issues beyond where perhaps they wanted to govern. And it may happen that the Democrats' issue groups will try to elevate their issues too now that there's a majority.
So there will be a big battle between inside both parties, I think.
Okay.
The Democrats won this election because they weren't Bush and they weren't the Republicans, and they've got to settle out. There are some interesting new Democrats, and there's going to be some strong voices. And Nancy Pelosi is not anyone to underestimate. When I was the chief of staff in California for the Assembly Republicans, she was the state party chairman back 30 years ago. And she was a tenacious state party chairman, and I've watched her for a long, long time. She learned her father was a great mayor, and her brother in Baltimore, and she came out to California, and she learned at the knee of Phil Burton, who was a legendary figure, congressman from San Francisco. So she's a tough, tested, and she's not just going to be this quote liberal San Francisco. And to get to the top of that heap, she'll be very formidable.
Well, the fact that she is elected from San Francisco, and the fact that all of the liberal groups in San Francisco complained that she wasn't liberal enough will probably stand her in great stead going forward.
Right. What surprised you the most in this election? Local election, national, what surprised you?
What surprised me is to see, when you look at the people who were defeated, it wasn't just a fringe element, it wasn't just close elections. When you lose a Jim Ryan in Kansas, Olympic miler, Kansas. When you look at Indiana and you lose 3 seats in Indiana, when you lose seats here in a state like this, and even though we didn't lose Reynolds and Walsh, they were
hard pressed.
Hard pressed,
absolutely.
And you lose an Arizona seat. I mean, it's across the board. There's not a member who's going to basically say, gee, I don't have to worry about this anymore. I'm an election-proof district. I think every member is going to basically be saying, I better get a poll. I better start looking at this thing early. I better not take anything for granted.
What surprised me? Well, it didn't surprise me. I think Bill Clinton comes out a winner. He campaigned for an awful lot of people.
Yeah, but
they
did you
won.
see him last night, though? Oh,
but I'm just saying, he won. He can now, to some degree, say he's taken on both Bushes and bested them at their game. And the thing that I was amused by was the Republican who won the governorship of Florida had refused to appear with the president when the president came into Tampa area. So
toxic.
Then that might have been enough to keep him from being toppled over. I don't know what the result was, but he did win.
54% is what he got in a state that was overwhelming Florida.
Big. The president's going to address the nation this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon. What should he say, and what will he say? And what audience, should and will?
Well, if you take a lesson from these things, you have to reach out and say, I'm ready to work with, the new folks who are coming to town. That's what I think most Americans are waiting to hear. It's what Clinton had to do in '94 when they lost the House and Senate. Mm-hmm. It's the kind of thing Ronald Reagan had to do when, in 1986, the Senate went back to the Democrats. And people expect it. They have voted, they've sent a message to their president with the votes yesterday, and he should hear it. And I'm fairly confident that he understands what he has to do. I'd be surprised if he didn't.
Ed.
If he doesn't, I mean, if it's sort of a mission accomplished, or we're staying the course, or okay, let's march forward. And
you made a mistake.
I'm not changing.
We had that silly election.
I'm not changing anything.
I didn't read the paper.
Then I think he certainly will be viewed in a much less position than he needs to be. He's still the president, and I think the critical thing is his legacy and the country's foreign policy legacy is this war. And no matter what the Democrats want to do, we're not getting out of Iraq for the next couple of years, and there's no money to do anything else. And so there has to be a partnership. If the Democrats want to destroy themselves very quickly, they will basically, the only thing they can do is have oversight hearings or cut off the resources, and that will turn the country off. I think, but I think at the same time, the president has to look hard and fast at how I can do this better or more efficiently or more effectively, and take it very seriously. And my sense is the best thing that could happen is Rumsfeld resign very quickly. The president's not going to fire him, I don't think, but he should resign, and someone new come in there that can give us a new energy.
What would be the sound bite that you would want to come out of that speech?
I hear you. I hear you.
Bill?
Well, who am I to give advice to anyone named Bush in politics? They've come up with some great sound bites in history, but they generally have to do with taxes and things.
Okay. Give me the second headline then.
I think the second headline is that that I'll cooperate. That that I'm looking forward to sitting down with Pelosi, and you got to remember this was probably as vicious a campaign by any president in recent history.
Absolutely.
In which he called these people un-American, unpatriotic, all the rest of it.
Terrorist hugging.
Terrorist, and so it's not exactly like they're going to grab him and sit around and have graham crackers and milk. Down
at the ranch?
Not at the ranch. And
clearing brush, riding bikes.
And so there's, I think to a certain extent, I think all the words will be there today, and I think Pelosi will say all the words today, but I think at the end of the day, there's still a long, hard way to go here to get this thing to work.
And then Tony Snow last night said, in regard to that, we're going to get a lot done on energy, education. Those are things we can work on. So they're already setting out areas of perhaps mutual working together, the White House and the House.
If they're the Democrat plans. I mean, if they are willing to, first on energy, if they're willing to let the Cheney group.
Forget it.
If they're willing to let the group that they've been fighting for 6 years to show which industry lobbyists sat in and gave Cheney their advice and counsel, that's the first request that they'll make.
Do you see
well,
that?
By the way, he went hunting yesterday after voting. Is there any news out of that?
Nice. But he took his shoelaces and his belt away from him.
Well.
Assuming that the Democrats just take the House and do not take the Senate, what happens? How is the governance of the United States and the politics of the United States changed from what it is now?
Well, look, in terms of the Senate, it could theoretically be 50-50. And I don't know that that's good. I don't know that that's good because...
Right. Well, then Cheney breaks the tie.
Cheney breaks the tie. We'll tend to know where the vice president is on a day-to-day basis, probably. But it's so close that I think the makeup of committees get affected. If civility reigns in the Senate, as it sometimes has in the past, and much more so than the House, it might affect the actual breakdown on the committees in terms of you're not going to have an 8-4 committee. It's going to be, more like 7-5, that kind of thing. And that allows you to talk policy within the Senate.
I would argue if it's 50-50, the original agreement when Bush won, and it was a 50-50, they had an agreement to have equal staff and equal split.
Right.
And it only broke when obviously Republicans forced Jeffords out of the caucus. I don't think Democrats will take anything less. I think that so my sense is you may win on the votes that come when you bring the vice president up there, but there's a lot of activity that goes on. There's a lot of procedural stuff, and my sense is in a given day, the Democrats can shut the Senate down, and that's obviously not in the best interest of the country or their best interest. I think at the end of the day, they're going to end up with the 51st vote. I think these two
are going to go.
Are going to go.
Both Montana and
I think at the end of the day, you know, it's the critical thing here is, you know, I worked for a president where we had minorities with President Reagan, and we had to put coalitions together. I don't know whether the possibilities are there to put coalitions together, and that's the.
I don't know, but you know who may be a very happy person today is Senator Robert Byrd, and not because he won, but because Rick Santorum is gone.
Oh,
Rick Santorum personally insulted him on the floor of the Senate in his first year in office, and basically said, "I'll be here when you're gone." And you shouldn't count your chickens before they hatch, especially when you're dealing with Robert Byrd.
Okay, what would you gloat about most in this election now that Bill did his?
Oh, that wasn't my fight.
No, I'm kidding.
You know, I think to a certain extent, Republicans, and I hate to say this, as someone who spent 25 years of my life trying to elect a Republican majority, both as the head of the Congressional Committee and as White House political director, my disappointment is we didn't live up to our promises. You know, when we came in, and we were there before Republicans, the majority were there, you know, 6 years before Bush. And they let Bush take it over and sort of run it roughshod. But you go back and look at the contract with America, which we were going to be different than the Democrats. We weren't different. At the end of the day, we were as arrogant, probably as corrupt. We get caught by the lobbyists and all the rest of it. And to the public looking at us, we weren't, and to our own members, our own voters out there, we weren't fiscal conservatives. We didn't have the ethics. You know, for 2 years we could have done ethics reforms. The only change they made is ex-members of Congress who lobby can't use the gym. You know, and that's the only rule change they made.
Okay.
And so, you know, we bought it on ourselves.
Okay, so you're telling me that this is a throw the hypocritical bums out election? Is that the epitaph for this election?
I think it was an anti-Bush, anti-war, but I do think that's the caveat that probably finished it. And as an old boxer, you don't knock somebody out unless you are Joe Louis with one punch. It's a series.
Okay.
And I think to a certain extent the corruption, the ethics was what really weighed it down. It's like Katrina. It wasn't just the war, but when it came to Katrina, it became symbolic of everything about this administration.
There was a synergy, right?
A synergy of mismanagement.
Yep.
And I think that's what broke the back.
The epitaph, 5 words. What's the epitaph here?
Well, I think it's what you said at the beginning. All politics is local except when it isn't. In New York, it looks like the congressional races were determined, the ones that changed hands, on local politics. The Sweeney race,
right.
The Hall race.
But if you look at
across the country, it was a national feeling that something's got to give, and we're going to use the votes to do it. And the fact that you have Democrats on the verge of taking Senate seats in Montana and Missouri, and with a recount in Virginia, it means all around this country, people want the government in Washington and elsewhere to stop a lot of the bickering and deal with some real problems. And I think that's one of the things that was not going on with all the rhetoric.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Great, thank you.
We'll talk further.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.